all were involved in body protective mechanisms. We learned architectural principles of stress from the structure of the body and the muscles. Everything that we really have on the outside of us is simply a broadening and generalizing of the structure within us. And most of all, there was a wisdom in it. And that wisdom was that the natural procedures of nature in bringing formal structures into manifestation, these procedures were one of man's most available sources of instruction, by means of which he might learn of all things by becoming aware of a few things in their action upon each other. In the same sense, therefore, the body gradually becomes analogous to the great cathedral. The great cathedral was a masterpiece of human engineering, but the human body is a masterpiece of divine engineering. And no rule that is going to stand in nature around us or in man's achievements can go contrary to the rules governing the creation of the physical form. The physical form was not really physical in origin. It was physical by extension. It is a body built by energy around an invisible core. And these energies flowing out of their own vitality enable this body to become a manifestation of themselves. The whole divine plan is revealed through man. In another analogy, we can go to some of the old Rosicrucian concepts of the 17th century, by means of which it was clearly indicated that the body was the small book. There were three great books upon which man could depend for honest information. In the Rosicrucian mysteries, the first of these was the Holy Scripture, the book of the prophets, the book of the Messianic dispensation, the book of the way of life within morality, integrity, and beauty. The second great manifestation, the great book, was the universe, in which man, by gradually exploring the infinite resources of space around him, and gradually becoming aware of the laws moving inevitably and immutably through this space, the individual, by the study of the universe, the created composite body of all things, could come to better understand the Creator, and finally, by downgrading a little bit, in a sense, its perspective, it could come finally to the realization that man himself was the third book. And man himself was the miniature in which things vast and impenetrable might become more obvious, more simple, and more direct to our attention. It is not so easy to fathom the mysteries of deity or the Holy Scriptures. It is not within everyone's capacity to understand the universe and all of its mysterious workings. But when these things are brought together in a little model, a miniature of the whole, they are available to us every day, in every walk of life. They are closer to us than any physical relationship that can exist, because they are part of ourselves. And by exploring the little universe ourselves, we not only become more aware of the greater universe, but we also become aware that this greater universe is also within us, that all of the great principles of truth, all of the great wisdom of the ages, all of the great spiritual revelations are brought downward in a mysterious way and locked within the body of the human being. It is difficult to understand some of these mysteries, but they have been worked on rather conscientiously and reverently for very long periods of time. Now, as we enter a little closer to the body and begin to study its structure, we know that the body exists for one purpose only, and that is to reveal that which is within it. That the body exists to provide an appropriate instrument for the measurements and for the manifestations of the human soul. Thus the body has to have a formal structure suitable to meet the same needs that the universe had when it came forth out of the pre-existent condition of things. The body, therefore, has to be more than a mass of matter. It has to be more than a mere machine. It has to become a means for the expression of that which is within it. And in order to do this, the same processes were necessary as those which brought forth the larger universe. The universe consists of energies moving through organization. And we know that the great cosmological systems of antiquity were really symbolical of the anatomy and physiology of man. Many ancient religions, including those of India and China, based much of their philosophy upon the human body. They did not call it that directly, but they compared various parts of the human body with universal procedures and found that the analogies were accurate and inevitable and true. Under these conditions, what do we find? Primarily, that the body is divisible into systems or parts. These systems or parts are all of them created to make possible the compound function of man. The first thing we realize is that the human being as a body is a commonwealth. We also realize that this body is the most magnificent example of cooperation that exists to our knowledge and understanding. There is cooperation in the parts of the body that we have never been able to find in human society. This cooperation means that all parts are working together for the common good. This is something that we know is necessary, but we've never been able to take this great truth and expand it into our collective existence. We realize that in the body, nothing is indispensable. We realize that within the body, all sections, parts, elements, and degrees of bodily existence are in a magnificent, homogeneous pattern, that they are working together forever, and that a discord is artificial to them and is not natural to them. The body, then, represents, in a sense, humanity. It gives us an understanding of the relationship of parts to the whole. Within the body of man, there are more separate living entities than there are creatures upon the surface of the earth. Not only does this involve human beings, but every form of life that exists. Within the human body, there is a far greater assembly of life than to be found anywhere else. But because these units are so small that we cannot see them, because they sometimes are born and die within a few hours, because they are so completely involved in the structures which they nourish and sustain, we simply lose sight of the fact that we are not one being alone, but that the human body is a field of evolution for millions and billions of living things. Everyone, therefore, has his own kingdom. He has an empire over which he rules. And he can be a good ruler or he can be a tyrant. He can serve this body's needs properly, or he can use it to exploit its resources for the advancement of his ambitions or his own self-centeredness. If he does this, he is a bad governor. And as a bad governor, he will ultimately be deposed. And we see around us today in society where one tyrant after another loses power, where revolution after revolution upsets the earth, and where one tyranny is largely supplemented by another. But this is bad government, and it is contrary to the magnificent cooperation which makes up the human being himself. It tells us beyond doubt that we must live together in peace, or the common body will perish, and that any disturbance which is neglected Any misunderstanding or misinterpretation which is allowed to continue will produce within the body the same anarchy that it produces politically in society. So we are our brother's keeper in a sense. We are certainly the keeper of the life that has been given to us. If we are God's in the making, it is time for us to make good our kingdom right here where it is. And that begins by the proper understanding of what constitutes normal, proper relationship between governing and governed. Now, the governing in man is not perfect either. We are all growing and unfolding creatures. We are releasing little by little the divine potential which is within us. We may not always be able to be the wisest of governors, but we do have the responsibility to make a good try. We are responsible to be as nearly good rulers as possible. So we may say to ourselves, where do we find the guides? Where do we find the information necessary to help us to be good rulers? The Greeks believed that we could find it largely by consideration of living bodies and through autopsy, in which the inner structure is made known, which for a long time human beings failed to understand at all. It was not until the rise of Vesalius that the study of the human anatomy was more or less organized. And in this study we discovered that underneath the skin there is one of the most complex and magnificent structures that can possibly be imagined. And that all this structure is in a sense part of what is necessary to maintain the composite body. Without realizing this, we lose most of the significance of our own lives. And no one who has a fair study of anatomy and physiology and histology can deny that from these forms of learning we can find what keeps the body in order. But what we haven't done is to moralize on this. We have not recognized it as a symbol of the larger world in which we live. Now today we are in a great crisis in the world. We're a crisis in which we discover that the lack of cooperation, the lack of dedication, the lack of the realization that humanity is a body, and that this body is ensouled, and that the corruptions by which human beings relate to each other, these corruptions cause world sickness, just as they cause confusion within the body itself. As we go a little further into this problem, we also begin to estimate the various structures which are necessary to maintain a body. And we know that the three principal centers of the human body are definitely a trinity, a triune administrative structure. Ourselves are like little villages along the shores of a great river. For the great arterial river that flows out of the heart is for the preservation and the healing of the nations. So we have the heart and its structure. Now the heart structure is a septenary. For within it, as we are told in the book of Genesis, the spirits of Elohim moved upon the surface of the deep. The heart has its own hierarchy. It has its own agencies. It has its own angels and archangels and powers and principalities. It is a tremendous, mysterious structure. And it has to be administered through an infinite concatenation of supporting functions and factors. The mystery of the heart is something that we really think very little about unless something goes wrong with it. And then, probably more than in any other type of ailment, a kind of fear sets in upon us. Because only under those conditions do we really begin to understand what the heart means. And it is only in the failure of civilization, in its own adjustments, that we finally come to understand what the failure of love means. That all things are primarily sustained by a power which